Hey, it's Michael, and I've got a question for you. I want you to think back to the last time you were in conflict with someone or in a disagreement. Did you ever, in that conversation, stop to ask yourself, what am I missing? Welcome to the follow up question. I'm your host, Michael Ashford. Come with me on a journey as I explore how we communicate well. What we have been taught about communication and what has been modeled and incentivized through our culture has left us in a place where we know how to exert our ideas and opinions and beliefs onto each other, but we miss the other half of conversation, the extraction. My aim with this show is to bring you perspectives and ways of looking at issues or topics that perhaps you haven't considered before. To teach you how to ask curious questions, how to seek understanding over certainty, and how to listen and give space so that ultimately you might become a better communicator. I'm a former journalist who believes everyone has a story to tell, and it's only when we ask questions and listen that we reveal what connects us as humans. Our dreams, our desires, our experiences, our ideas, and what we stand for, rather than what we are against. Hey friend, welcome back to the follow-up question. This is going to be another solo episode from me. One more of these before I jump back into the interview episodes, and I've got some great guests lined up that you are going to absolutely love. But for one more episode, I'm going to just take the mic myself, and this one's not scripted. This one is straight from me. I've got a couple notes here in front of me of what I want to talk about, but this is going to be raw, off the cuff kind of dialogue from me to you, really to explain some of the thought process and some of the behind the scenes of what it went into my book, my new book, which is available on pre-order right now. My new book, Can I Ask a Question? Following your curiosity to shift the paradigm of communication, conflict, and change. I want to detail to you why I wrote this book, why it was so important to me, how this book came about, what I was noticing and seeing in the conversations that were taking place here on this show that you've heard for over 100 episodes now. How could I take the things I was noticing, the themes, the woven threads throughout all of these conversations, and distill them down into roughly 140 pages for you, and give you my view and thoughts on what I was seeing and hearing, packaged in a way that I think could help us communicate better with each other. Just like the episode intro or the intro to this podcast says, I want to teach you how to communicate well, especially when conflict is present. So that's what this episode's going to be about. And I'm just going to share what I'm noticing. There is a methodology of communicating through conflict and disagreement that I write about in the book that I want to just touch on with you here and share that with you so that you can understand where I'm going with this show, what's in the book, of course, and hopefully give you a path, an outline to better your own communication skills when conflict is present. And it doesn't have to be political conflict. I want to make that clear. It doesn't have to be just talking about the big, nasty, monstrous issues that I think we're all feeling at a higher society level. Those are certainly still there and not to be dismissed. But even in our everyday conversations with each other, with family members, with friends, with coworkers, with random strangers that we perhaps begin talking to at a conference or, I don't know, wherever you're at. If conflict arises, even if it's not like out and out headbutting conflict that we often think of when we hear that word, even if it's just disagreement, how can we better navigate those conversations? That's what I want for us. That's what I want for you. And so that is what I hope to cover in my book. That's the message that I hope to have gotten across. And that's what I want to share with you a little bit today. So, as we begin, I want to take you back, 8 years ago now, when I was the vice president of marketing at a software company here in Denver, Colorado, where I live. I was the vice president of marketing and strategic partnerships, very long title. But we had just moved the company headquarters from San Francisco to Denver. And as part of that move, that's how I came to actually end up in Denver as well. I came from Kansas City and moved my family and I to the Denver, Colorado area. And as part of that move, the entire marketing team that had been based in San Francisco, they had the option to move to Denver. None of them took that option. And so they were given severance, and we gave them many, many months of runway to find new jobs, and we wished them well, but they would not be coming with us to Denver. So I had to hire a brand new marketing team here in Colorado. And mind you, I know how insane that sounds right now with the way that the world has changed with remote work and what has happened to us over the last several years, and just how the idea of not being able to keep San Francisco employees while the company was based in Denver is a little bit crazy, but that's just the way that the world, I guess, worked at the time. I didn't really question it. Perhaps I should have. Anyway, as part of hiring that marketing team here in Denver, I had to hire a brand new team. And one of the team members, or one of the positions I was hiring for, was that of marketing coordinator. This is kind of a do-it-all kind of position, but this particular role was in charge of our social media and our blog on our website and our in-person event strategies. We went to a lot of in-person events, conferences, trade shows. It was very important to us. So this person was in charge of managing that, or this role. And it came down to two people. One who was probably a little bit more highly qualified, had more, perhaps I'll say, experience, but I struggled to connect with this person. And then the other candidate was Lee. Lee was a little bit more unseasoned. He was just a few years out of college, but I saw something in him. I saw potential. I connected with Lee really, really well. And so I ultimately opted to hire Lee over the other person. And I remember taking Lee out to burgers at Highland Tap and Bar here in Denver in the Highlands neighborhood right after I hired him. And I sat him down. We were waiting on our food order. And I said, Lee, you've got to come through for me. You have to promise me that you will work hard, that you will do the things that this position requires you to do. You've got to step up and you've got to come through for me. And he promised me that he would. And I believed him. And for the first several months that Lee worked for me on my team, on my marketing team, he did exactly that. He was a well-liked member of the team. He got his stuff done. It was quality work, and I really had no issues or complaints. But several months into it, some things started to shift. Deadlines were starting to get missed here and there. New blogs, for instance, weren't being posted or weren't being edited by the deadline, by the assigned date. All right, that's a little bit of an issue, but we can work through that. Then we were starting to run up against shipping deadlines to get our trade show booths to the different conferences, and that costs us money when we miss shipping deadlines and have to overnight stuff or rush deliver stuff. Okay, that's a bigger issue. That's eating into my budget. And things can get lost. So missing shipping deadlines can ultimately mean we don't have a presence at that conference or trade show, which is a big issue. And then I started noticing Lee coming into work later and later and later each day. And we didn't have a set time that we had to be in the office, but when you're walking in at 11 a.m. and everybody had already been at work for a couple hours, the team notices, and the team did notice. And all of these things started to pile up where there started to be some, I'm not going to say animosity, but just some angst among the team. Like, what's going on here? He's not doing his part of of the job. He's not being a part of the team like he had been. And when you get to this point, there were things I tried, ways that I tried to motivate Lee or tell him like, look, hey, this is a hard and fast deadline. You have to meet this. There were things that I did as his manager that I was trying to correct that behavior. And eventually, after so long, what is often the case in the business world, if you're unfamiliar, is when an employee consistently shows that subpar behavior, that underperforming behavior, you have to put them on a performance improvement plan. And a performance improvement plan, or a PIP as it's called, is simply a document that outlines the standards and expectations that you must meet over a certain period of time. And if you don't meet them, you can either get demoted or, as is more often the case, you can get fired. So it is a drawing a line in the sand kind of moment for someone who gets put on a PIP. So I got to that point with Lee. And I'll be honest, Lee was not going to be the first first employee of mine who I had put on a PIP before in my career. And I'll be even more honest, every single person that I had put on a PIP before, I had fired them. And often that is the dirty little secret of the business world. A performance improvement plan is often simply put in place as a way to document an employee's underperformance so that you can fire them. It is just what's the word I'm looking for? A formality. It's a formality in many cases. So the odds were not good that Lee was going to have a job over the course of, I don't know, a month, 2 months, whatever the timeline was that the performance improvement plan was going to be in place. But if I went back to those initial conversations I had with Lee and why I hired him in the first place, and I knew that he could do good work. I had seen it. I knew that he was a well-valued, well-liked member of the team. I had seen it. And so before I put the PIP together and sat down with Lee to present it to him, I asked myself a question. Is setting Lee up to fail how I want to be a manager and a leader? Was hurting Lee to change, was forcing him to change in this way, this kind of all or nothing binary, you either do or you don't, was what method of I guess, motivation, I can't really call it that, was that how I wanted to lead and manage? And the answer was no. And if that was the case, then I had to approach that situation and that performance improvement plan differently. I had to understand something that I didn't know in that moment. And that led to another question. If that's not how I want to lead, if there is something here that I can believe in and that I can attach to, what could I be missing about this situation that has caused this underperformance? And when that question drove me, what could I be missing? And when I finally sat down with Lee and we discussed, hey, this is unacceptable, your performance, you have to go on a performance improvement plan. But before we talk about what that looks like, Lee, are you okay? Is there anything I need to know? Those are the questions that I asked him. Now, here's where I'm going to be kind of vague because I don't want to get too deep into the weeds. But Lee shared with me some things that he was going through in his personal life that were deeply, deeply affecting him. So much so to the point that he was leaving work at night and going home to his apartment and dealing with these issues until the wee hours of the morning, until he was exhausted, fell asleep, and would wake up in the morning unmotivated, not really knowing which direction his life was going to go. And yeah, he'd show up late to work. I have to admit, who wouldn't in that case with what I know he was dealing with? And again, I'll be vague there. But can you imagine the damage that I would have done to Lee to his career and to his personal life if I had set him up to fail with a performance improvement plan. If I had tried to hurt him to change, to force him to change, if I had not asked the question, is that how I want to lead and manage? Followed by the next question, what could I be missing about this situation? Can you imagine the damage that I would have done to his life and his career if I had set him up to kick him out to the curb in a month, 2 months, had I not asked those questions? In the context of that conversation, Lee and I could then take what he was dealing with, still agree that his performance was not where it needed to be, but then we could begin to co-create something new out of that situation, a plan moving forward that still held him accountable, while also recognizing the humanity of the situation and what he was going through and dealing with, and that this all or nothing approach wasn't going to be kind, nor achievable or attainable. And I am happy to admit that Lee crushed it. Over the next several weeks, he had deadlines and expectations that grew, but we started small and we added as things got just a little bit easier, and Lee got further and further removed from the issues that he was dealing with, and eventually we moved beyond that. But he fulfilled the expectations and the requirements of his performance improvement plan. He did go on to again get back to that level of productivity that he had displayed before. And Lee went on to be a wonderful employee until we both left that company. And we are still friends today. He actually has moved away from the United States. He comes back every now and then to Denver, and we get together. And the last time we were together, we joked. Hey, remember that? He joked with me. Hey, remember that time you put me on a PIP? And we can laugh about that now. We can laugh about it because it was not this chasm in our relationship, but it was a thing that it was a hard time that we got through together. It was a difficult thing that we got through together. And when I think about conflict, when I think about communicating through conflict, I think we all, more than even we realize, want and desire and need common ground. We have this desire for common ground, to live in this state of harmony with each other, understanding our differences and understanding that there are different ways that we move about the world and the ways that we see the world, but that we can live in harmony. And ultimately, actually, I believe that's how most of us exist today. Most of the big issues and the huge arguments that we see happening on social media or on the news channels or in the headlines, those things don't affect us day to day. And actually, we're really good about living in harmony with each other, for the most part, day in and day out. I do think it's important to acknowledge here, though, that there are certainly people who live in circumstances, who live in environments where harmony and peace is non-existent or really hard to come by. I want to acknowledge that and affirm that that actually takes place so that it doesn't feel like I'm discounting those experiences. Those absolutely happen, and I acknowledge that here. However, we all have a desire to protect those we love, ourselves and those we love, from harm. And actually, we're really good about creating that within our little universe of control. The things right in front of us that we can control, the relationships that we can affect. That exists between all of us because we actually want that. We desire that. We crave that as human beings. Now, when conflict enters, and it often does, it always will, when conflict enters that state of general harmony with each other on a day in and day out basis, Yes, we might get mad at somebody cutting us off in traffic or being rude at the grocery store, or I don't know. But when true conflict enters the picture, when that becomes the focal point of our interaction with someone, that we're coming at it from a place of conflict, we lose sight of that common ground. We lose sight of that harmony, and we often devolve into this state of wanting to change that person to fit our worldview, to fit how we see the issue, to fit how we believe the solution should be applied, to regain that state of harmony, that state of peace, that state of working together and general togetherness. I don't know a better way to put that. But when conflict enters, that's when this yearning for common ground, this yearning for peace around us begins to splinter and split, and we see disagreement, we see conflict as something that is threatening our way of life, trying to change us, and so we respond by trying to change them, that other person, the person I disagree with, the person who I don't see eye to eye with, the person I'm in conflict with. The problem with this, not that conflict is a problem. Conflict is you can't get away from it. It is a requirement of being a human, is that you will go through conflict. So the idea is not to make conflict non-existent and to never happen. You're never going to prevent conflict. The problem we take is our approach to change and how we try to bring about change. Because what we often try to do, well, let me take a step back. Do you like being forced to change? If you go back to the story about Lee, do you think Lee would have liked being forced to change in that moment? Could he have even dealt with being forced to change in that moment? That's a question I'll leave just out there in the open. But for you, do you like to be forced to change? I know I don't. I hate it. I hate being told that what I'm doing is wrong, in air quotes, and that I must change. One of my favorite quotes about change is from author and leadership coach John C. Maxwell. And he said, people change when they hurt enough that they have to, when they see enough that they're inspired to, when they learn enough that they want to, and when they receive enough that they're able to. Now, one of these things is not like the other. Does anyone want to be hurt to change? It happens. It absolutely does. But does anyone want that? Or instead, would you rather be inspired to change? To learn enough that you are capable of change because you understand more, that you receive enough that you are able to change. Don't we want that? Don't we want that to be the method or the way of which we change? I know I don't want to be hurt to change. But the problem when conflict enters our relationships and the way we communicate through conflict occurs when we try to hurt people to change. Another way of saying hurt people to change is force them to. We know, you don't want to be forced to change. Yet when conflict exists in conversations, that is our default. That is your default. That is my default. That is everyone else's default, is to try and force change upon someone. And when that happens, nothing happens. Rarely. I'll give that little caveat. Rarely does anything happen, because when you try to force someone to change and you have not built the trust, you have not built the foundational relationship to bring about change in that person's life, they dig in with their mindset, with their views, with their opinions, with their ideas of how the way the world should and could work. They dig in, and you will meet an immovable object at that point. And in fact, there are stories here on this podcast that you have heard of exactly that. You can go back and listen to Jesse Morton's interview. You can go back and listen to Jeff Scoop's interview. You can go back and listen to Ashley Vanderbilt's interview. 3 examples right there of people who got deep into a world that was ultimately harmful to them and to others. But whenever somebody tried to force them to leave, tried to force them to change, they resisted. They fought back harder. They dug in firmer. In Jeff Scoop's case, the former leader of the National Socialist Movement, the largest neo-Nazi organization in the United States, even when somebody literally punched Jeff in the face, he did not change. But that's how we try to approach conflict. That's how we try to navigate conflict. We immediately default to trying forcing someone to change, that we believe our beliefs are best, and all we have to do is argue our beliefs, our facts, the way that we see the world hard enough, loud enough, strong enough that that person ultimately either acquiesces and comes to our side, or they shrink away in cowardice and fear, never to be heard from again, and we don't have to think about them. Except we do, because they didn't leave. They're still there. And chances are, if they come back, they're going to come back 2 times, 3 times, 4 times stronger, with more fury and gusto the next time you interact with them, because they know how you made them feel. So what I have found in all of the conversations that I have had here on this show, on this podcast, is a methodology of changing that approach to conflict communication. To go back to John Maxwell's quote, when they see enough that they're inspired to, when they learn enough that they want to, when they receive enough that they're able to, that's how we want to bring about real change. And what I have found and what I have heard and what I ultimately wrote about in my book, Can I Ask a Question?, is what I call the ask, then see methodology of conflict communication. And it goes like this. You first have to get yourself in the mindset to navigate tough, difficult, hard conversations where conflict and disagreement is present. So you first have to ask. And ask stands for assume positive intent, set aside your ego, and know that you don't know everything. The ask part of the ask then see method is all about getting you in the right psychological headspace. It's all about getting you in a posture to actually have a conversation where you're not trying to force someone to change, but where you're actually trying to co-create something new, where you're actually trying to go back to that shared space that we all want and love, where we're in harmony with each other, where we're finding common ground with each other, where we're not at odds with each other. Assume positive intent, I got to admit, that language comes from where I work full-time as the director of marketing at a company called The Receptionist. Assume positive intent is underneath one of our core values. This particular core value is respectful. One of our core values is that we are respectful people. And as part of that, we assume positive intent of the other person, even when they disagree with us. We assume that they are not out to hurt us. We assume that they that they have some sort of positive goal, no matter how, I'll even say myopic that goal might be, no matter how misinformed that goal might be, they have positive intent. And if I can enter into a conversation with somebody assuming that they have positive intent, I don't have to see them as my enemy. Then we got to set aside our ego. That's the S in ask. Set aside our ego means you have to set aside your need to be right. You have to set aside your desire for certainty. Certainty that your way is the right way, that your way is the way that it should be. And understand that rarely are there only two answers to a problem. There are often multiple. And what does right mean anyway? Right is based on values. And values, we share values, they just might be in different priorities, or an order of prioritization. But set aside your ego. Set aside that need to win the argument and instead invite in curiosity and a little bit of uncertainty. And with that, that's the K in ask. Know that you don't know everything. That's simply not possible to know everything. There are things that you don't know about. Oftentimes, what little you know gives you a false sense of knowing far more than you actually do. That's the Dunning-Kruger effect. You should go look it up. But if you know that you don't know everything, that means there are things that you could and likely are wrong about. And if that's the case, don't you want to know? I know I do. I want to know what I'm wrong about, or maybe don't have all the information about, or as much as I could. So assume positive intent of others. Set aside your ego and know that you don't know everything. When you get yourself in that headspace, then, because it's the ask then see methodology, then you begin asking questions. And the questions go in order. They go in a particular order. And that the elements of ask, those psychological elements, they flow through with you through all of these. It's not ask and see, it's ask then see, because you are constantly, as you begin to ask questions, going to have to continue to remind yourself to set aside your ego. I don't need to be right here. I don't know everything here. I got to ask another question. This person's making me mad, but I assume positive intent of them. Those carry through, by the way. So then you go and see. The S in C stands for search yourself. Ask questions of yourself to understand what you truly believe, and more importantly, how you came to those beliefs based on your life's experience and the influences that made up those experiences. This is not a request for you to search yourself and discover everything that is wrong about you and your beliefs. It's not what it is at all. This is trying to understand yourself better so that you can have a more full view of what makes you you and how your experiences of moving about this world on this planet have made up your ideas, your opinions. It's how it's shaped your view of the world and the people in it. The first E then of C is explore other perspectives. So once you have searched yourself and asked these questions of yourself, then get curious about others. You don't have to, you're still in your head at this point, but explore other perspectives. Ask questions about others. Get curious in your mind about how someone else's life might cause them to see the world and experience the world a little bit differently than you. Maybe not even so differently than you, but just a little bit differently. How might where you grew up affect your belief systems, your ideas, your way of seeing the world? And then, gosh, I'm from small town Kansas. How might somebody in Detroit, Michigan experience the world and everything that we've seen the last few decades? What would that look like for them? So explore other perspectives. You're still within the safety of your own mind, but you're starting to ask questions about others. And finally, the last E in C is exchange your curiosity with others. Go and seek out someone who disagrees with you. Ask questions of people whose ideas and beliefs and thoughts you disagree with to bring about a more full understanding of the world. If you can do this and do this on a regular basis, if you can engage in conversations with people who disagree with you and take the posture, take the mindset of curiosity, of wanting to learn, of wanting to understand rather than wanting to be right, change will happen. Change will happen, no doubt. The key to understand or be aware of is that change might not look like your ego wants it to look like. That change might not be as wholly satisfying as you want it to be in a perfect world. But even if the change is a calming of nerves, even if the change is an admission that, yeah, you might be right about that. So what are we going to do about it? Even if change is, you know what, I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I made you feel that way. I still believe what I believe, but let's work through this. Isn't that better? Don't we want that? I think we do. I think you do. I know I do. Now, we ultimately have to get to a place where we are solving problems. Yes. We do disagree on many, many things that are important and that need solutions. But what I'm saying is when you take this methodology, when you follow your curiosity, when you ask questions, when you get curious about someone to try and understand them rather than change them to fit your view of the world, new solutions come out of those conversations. New ways of approaching problems come out of those conversations. Things that we have not even perhaps thought of before, because we now have this fuller, richer understanding of how the world works and how those in it see it and experience it. And out of that place of shared understanding, we can co-create new solutions to big problems that, while yes, it may not be wholly and 100% the way that you would do it if you existed in a vacuum, doing something is better than doing nothing. I believe that we all believe that to be true. And ultimately, and this is what I talked about in my second TEDx talk, little insider info here. My two TEDx talks that I've done, the first one was kind of the first chapter of the book, and the second TEDx talk was the last chapter of the book. So if you want maybe a little bit of a sneak preview of the book, go watch my TEDx talks. But ultimately, if you follow this methodology and we come to this place of co-creation, co-creating new solutions to big problems, even when we disagree, we return to that state that we want. We find peace. We find true, real peace with each other. Because if you go back to something I said earlier, where when we try to force others to change, when we try to hurt others to change, taking this mindset that we can just get them to come over to our side if we just bludgeon them with enough facts and figures and scream loud enough, or that they go and shrink and hide and fall away. Even when we do that, there is a sense of peacelessness in the world, in your world, because you know, and I said this in my TEDx talk, you know that that person and that belief and that ideology still exists, and it could rear its head at any moment. I call it the specter of disharmony. It lurks in the shadows of every conversation, every interaction that you might have with someone, because you've never dealt with the actual true issue. You've never dealt with how people actually change. So even when you get to this place of quote unquote peace, where these people who made you uncomfortable, where the people who you disagree with are removed from your life, or so far removed from your life that you can point to them and say, look at them over there. Those idiots, those fools. You can think of probably much worse names to call people, I'm sure. They might be going through your head right now. We can just point to them and keep them over there at arm's bay and call them our enemies. They don't. They're not like us, right? Are you really at peace? That's a stalemate. That's a Cold War. That's not peace. Yeah, there might be a ceasefire at the moment, but we could take up arms at any point, and this is not literal arms, okay? Please understand what the language I'm using here. I'm trying to paint a picture. It could happen at any moment where we are thrown back into conflict, and that creates such an anxiety about us, a sense of peacelessness about us, that we know that our attempts at change, at forcing or hurting others to change, did nothing. But when you can engage in those conversations, when you can ask questions of each other, when you can create common shared understanding, you shift the paradigm of what it means to communicate with someone you disagree with, and you bring about real change. You inspire. You teach. You give. All in an effort to bring about true, actual change. That's what my book is about. Those are the themes that I have discovered and uncovered and heard over the course of the conversations. And those are still ongoing, by the way. One of the challenges of writing this book, Can I Ask a Question?, was I didn't know where to stop, because I kept having conversation after conversation with guest after guest on this show. And I would write in my notebook, I got to put that in the book. But at some point I had to stop and actually write the thing. And that's what I've done. So as of this episode dropping, this episode drops on Monday, September 18th, 2023. The book is available on pre-order for 3 more days. It's available on pre-order through Wednesday, September 20th, 2023 at a discounted rate, $5 off, and you actually get the book before it's even publicly available, and you also get it signed by me. You can go to michaelashford.com/canIaskAquestion, all one word, no spaces, and that'll take you to the pre-order where you can get the book before anybody else. Well, of course, all the other pre-orders get it as well, but before it's publicly available. And you get to save a little bit of money as well. But I hope this was an insightful look into what went into my thought process of what went into writing the book. And in the book, I share story after story after story of where this ask then see method has actually worked to solve problems, has actually worked to co-create new solutions, has actually worked to bring about true, real, lasting, sustainable peace. That's what we want. That is our shared reality as humans. That desire. And if you go back to my story about Lee, I didn't force him to change. What I hope happened was that we worked together, we co-created a new way forward together that brought about and continued a friendship, but that brought about something greater than we could have individually produced in that moment. And that's what I want for us. That's what I want for you. That's what I want for myself. That's what I want for us. And I hope this book provides an outline of how we can get there, a real example of how we can get there. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of The Follow-Up Question. I will be back next time with the start of more interviews from more amazing guests that you hear on the show, that you have been used to hearing on the show in the 100+ episodes that I've done so far. I cannot wait to bring you the stories and the perspectives of the guests that I've got lined up. Stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, please do me a favor. Share this show with someone you know in your network, even if it's just one person who might find some value in some of the things that I talk about here on the show and what our guests share here on the show. You would do me a world of a favor if you just shared this show with one person. I'll catch you on the next episode of The Follow-Up Question, and until then, keep asking questions.